Yeah. So, Stacie, thank you so much for joining us. This is Ayola talking. I'm over here. Yeah, so we are really grateful to have you here to talk to us about equal pay day and a lot of your scholarships that you focused on. So you said you had some like sort of opening statements, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll try to keep them somewhat brief because it sounded like maybe the discussion is perhaps a bigger part of what we want to do here.
Right.
So, equal pay day. I think one of the challenges in terms of libraries that we're faced with is that everyone across the board is seeing problematic things happen with wages relative to the labor that we're putting in because it's now built on a relatively unsustainable model of production, without wanting to the pay for the skill essentially and pay for the labor to do this. So while yes, everyone is seeing their wages go down across the board, one of the biggest challenges I think in libraries or really anywhere is in addressing the ways that that like wage stagnation affects people across different identities and different life experiences. So one of the things that we sought to do with the FAA Salary Survey last year that the Women's Archivists section put out was in trying to determine, which people having, which life experiences or which identities were experiencing the most disruption or the most inequity in terms of how they were getting paid or making a living. I mean, one question we asked everyone was, have you had to delay, a major life event within the past 5 years due to salary? And we define that as, did you have to put off like a major healthcare thing that you had to get done? Did you put off buying a home, or did you put off, starting or adding to a family? And certainly across the board, we saw that something like 60% of people who took the survey said that they had to put off, a major life event. And our peers in the field who identified in somewhat marginalized categories, like if they were people of color or people who express their religious faith by actively wearing items of clothing or other objects that identify what their faith is. Colleagues of ours with disabilities, notably autism, colleagues who identified as being somewhere on the autism spectrum. All of these different people noted, that not only yes had they had to put those things off, but that across the board, their salaries were noted as being significantly lower than other peers who did not identify in any of those categories. So I think really the biggest challenge facing us when we talk about equal pay day in libraries or in archives is in understanding that the way that the current system is set up, the model affects us all. So we really should all be working together to come up with answers to this, but the ways in which we're affected by these various systems of oppression affect us very differently or affect us in different ways. So, that's really the biggest thing or the thing that I think is most important to focus on. But discuss. Maybe those of you in school have some different ideas or thoughts about what's happening, why it's happening, what we can do to change things. What hiring managers can do, what maybe even our policymakers can do. So we'll add that it sounds like, at least right now, that IMLS and NEA and NEH were saved within this latest version of the budget bill that was passed a few weeks ago. But, it's definitely not a cool situation that it seems like, every 2 years we got to march up there and trot our sad stories out to the public about how these funding agencies are going to close. And woe is us, because that's where the biggest amount of our funding comes from to fund the labor that does this. And as, awesome as those funding agencies are, they shouldn't necessarily be, the stabilizing force that we look to getting work done in the field.
So, does anybody have any things that were on their mind or any questions here? We do have some questions that were asked ahead of time, but just wanted to open it up to anyone who has any questions or thoughts before we do that.
Sorry, I'm still processing. So in the statistics that you were mentioning,
oh wait, hold on. I can't hear you. Like all of a sudden you went dead there. That was very weird. Huh. Hold on. Okay. Hello? Oh, that's so weird. The phone is still okay. I can't hear. Should I maybe try to call back? Should I try to call back? Hello? Oh boy. Let's see here.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
okay.
I'm not gonna
So,
go.
Right. Sorry about that.
No, all good. It's just clarifying one. You're talking about the data where 60% who had taken the survey had put off a major life event. Was that within a specific sphere, like a public librarian specifically, or like, which information professionals were surveyed?
Oh, sure. So because we did this through the Women's Archivist section of the Society of American Archivists, everyone identified as an archivist in some way, or if not an archivist, working very specifically in some type of cultural heritage-based field. So while we did have some people in there who identified as working in archives that are nested within public libraries, overall, people are identifying as archivists or like archives adjacent technologists, like things of that nature. If they do technical services, they're largely doing technical services for special collections or university archives or something.
So so the first question that we had sent in was, there's been an increase in part-time positions in many libraries because they don't require employers to provide workers' benefits such as paid leave or healthcare. Part-time workers are also often excluded from unions. It's also suddenly loading the responses before we got to the question. 1 second. What would you suggest part-time workers do in order to collectively advocate for better working conditions?
That is a really challenging one. And, so it's interesting, like my first library job was a union job. And yeah, they did have to organize among the part-time workers, or the like non-salaried staff at that library. And it was hard. I mean, you're talking about, going up against administration who in some cases really aren't trying to hear it. And, what's happening now, especially for librarians who work in at-will states, like, they'll shut it down immediately. So I think, what I think is the biggest thing, or what's most important there, 'cause I'll be very honest, I have not had to be in that type of organizing situation on my job. But what it sounds like is the most important to me is that, you have to be able to get people in a room together to communicate across these different libraries, across their different issues. Friends of mine who are involved in organizing issues in their libraries or their archives. Emily Dravinsky is one who comes to mind, who, they went on strike actually last year during the winter time, and their admin played dirty. I mean, admin was trying to cut people's benefits, and they went really hard about the organizing efforts. But being able to stand in solidarity is really the biggest thing. As to how you go about doing that, though, I don't have a blueprint. What I can say is that people I know who seem to have been successful at it, they are successful at getting a lot of different groups to the table, basically, to talk. That's the most important thing. If everybody stays in their silos, or everybody kind of stays in their world, or, even more to the point, if people, with a relatively high level of privilege refuse to engage in the issues that their coworkers are going through, who may not have those same levels of privilege, we can't move forward on their behalf, and we can't change conditions for part-time workers or adjuncts in the university space or anything like that until we can advocate up and down the hierarchical org chart, basically.
Any other in-person questions? One quick question, Elizabeth. Sorry, is there a way that we can also see the chat while we're able to see Stacie? Because we do have one online attendant.
So you said in order to see the chat, do what now?
To see both you and the chat.
This is on our end.
Yeah, it's just on our end. Sorry. Yep.
Is
okay,
that better?
Awesome. Yeah. So, Chardell, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat, and we can have them that way. And in the meantime, another question that was sent in was, can you speak to credential creep and how that affects us as info professionals?
So credential creep is an interesting issue. I will say I've definitely seen it. I've seen instances of it, but I have not personally worked in an institution where, where like a PhD has become sort of the thing. And possibly that's because I've been working in these institutions where there's such a huge sort of institutional memory holdover of people who have worked there for 15 years or longer. They wouldn't be having it. They'd probably burn the library down. So I haven't seen anyone. I haven't been in a workplace where that is a thing. But I am aware that it's happening. And again, because those are decisions that get made at an admin level. I think so you're looking at a couple different things. One, you have to be able to reach out to admin folks and have a really strong case for as to why that's kind of problematic. But you also, at the hiring level, if you're a hiring manager, you get to that point, it's kind of your responsibility to write the job description in such a way that makes sure that credential creep doesn't become a thing. I know that at like AHA and the MLA conferences that people with those specific PhDs they are targeting libraries and archives in their job search. So it's also kind of two ways. It's not just that like your admin are jumping out and saying, hey, we only want PhDs. It's that, their job markets are super slim too, and they've started flooding this job market. There are administrators out there who like the bright and shiny thing of, ooh, so and so has a PhD. So it's kind of a mutually reinforcing thing. I don't think that it's that by and large. All of the admins just started looking for people with PhDs as much as people with PhDs started getting really creative about how they felt like they were going to apply those skills. Some people are with it, some people aren't. I personally don't have any plans to get a PhD, and I have not felt like that my decision to not do that has been a hindrance to me in any way. I kind of think that in this field too, if you're really, if you're doing the work, people notice that, and it's not going to really matter if you have that or not.
Stacie, I had a question about kind of like salary transparency. I feel like more job postings are being explicit, thankfully, about what they're going to offer. But I was recently talking to a friend who said like she had an application thrown out because she quoted an amount that they thought was too much, and said that she was basically like not qualified because she wanted to, earn a living wage and stuff. So do you have thoughts on that?
I do. There's another area in which we got to start having more conversations with each other, as awkward and as painful as it will be. Universities or any job really depends on how we've sort of set up our like social customs to never ask about those things. And it's only been now that I've gotten to a managerial level that, peers of mine are starting to talk a bit more openly about what they make, or in other cases, what they might be compensated for doing like additional professional development work, like when you do keynotes and things like that, because there's still very much a black box around it unless you work for an institution that has to reveal those things. I will also add that the dirty secret is, you could have universities, especially, they're notorious for this, who, okay, so maybe it's a public institution, they have to post the salary range, but, the range is actually a lie. They might give you a range and say, oh, this job is going to pay between, 40 and 75K. So you'll apply for it feeling like, oh, yeah, I could get that 75K. I mean, they're not going to offer that 75K. You could go on, especially if it's a public institution, you can go online and probably find that the majority of librarians in that institution maybe only make around 55. That's all they're really advocating for the position. So, there are some cases in which even though it looks transparent, that's still a lie. So to the extent that we just really have to start having more conversations with each other about what we make, what we're getting paid. And those are hard conversations to have. Those are hard conversations to have. But it's not going to change until we do that. And being willing to have some of those backdoor conversations too. So if I've ever left an institution, I'm always incredibly honest with anyone I know who might be thinking about applying to that institution. I am very candid with them about what those salaries look like, if I have information about it.
Moving forward. Since women often face repercussions for attempting to negotiate their pay, and negotiating is really important for getting paid their worth, how would you advise women job seekers when it comes to negotiating, especially women of color?
Absolutely. So what I did when I started this job, because I work at a private institution, so they did not post salaries at all. And not only did they not post salaries, I mean, that's never going to happen. So I really had to feel my way around. I think one of the strongest things that you can do is just make sure that you do your homework. So I spent I don't know. I spent about a week on like Glassdoor.com looking at, posted salaries for similar jobs that were within digital scholarship and, and whatever information I could find. I looked at public institutions. I looked at the salary scale for private institutions. And I came up with a number that I felt like was more appropriate than their initial offer. And I'm not going to say that that was easy for me to do because I had also been in a job previously where I had been told almost explicitly that I could not negotiate, or it was made clear to me that if I had tried to negotiate, I probably would have lost that job offer. And I'd also had a job where, when the person who was my boss hired me, he said, "Hey, you can. This is like the salary. You can negotiate." And I didn't because I was scared. I didn't even know how to do that. So in all honesty, it was having some assistance from my husband, who kind of was like, this is how you do this. And he was someone who had negotiated. He's also a person of color, but he had negotiated over a period of time for certain things. So, it's not that I'm saying that everybody needs a guy to tell them how to do it, or everybody needs a significant other. I'm just sharing basically the things that were in place that helped me kind of get it together and feel confident about making that ask. But even in addition to the things that he had told me, which was to you make your offer and you make it about 20 to 30% higher than what you actually want, knowing that if they're willing to negotiate with you, the negotiation point will come down to it'll come down to maybe what you really want. 20 to 30% ask is just to start, so you have somewhere to go under that. And I did. I practiced. I was practicing in the mirror how I thought, because I could see on the interview schedule that I had time for. They were gonna have me talk to the HR person, so I was legit in the mirror, okay, he's gonna tell me about this, and then I will say this, and it happened. I think what also helped me too was that when the offer came to me and I called back to accept it, the negotiations were done at our university. HR, we have a library HR person, but then actual salary negotiations go through a representative of the full university HR. So it also kind of helped me to feel like, all right, I am negotiating, but I'm not directly speaking to anyone who I will be working with. So it kind of, they put you at a little bit of a remove there, I think, for that reason. And that also helped because it felt less personal, But to the extent that, everybody doesn't necessarily have that situation, in some cases you might be negotiating with the person who will directly supervise you. The best that you can do is stay firm. And, quite honestly, if you can avoid applying for jobs that you know will not pay well, so let's assume that you have done your homework. I know everybody is not in that position to do that. But I also think, there's some merit to the idea that, cut those people off, make it clear that the most qualified people in the field would never even consider applying for your little job because you're not paying anything. You're not paying what you need to be paying. So they also understand, the people who you would most want to work here, this is trash and they're not going to consider it. And other people in the field are backing them up to say, hey, this is a terrible job posting. This is a terrible job posting. This is a terrible salary. No one should take that job.
So here's another question from online. Statistically, even though it's a female-dominated field, the highest authority positions are disproportionately given to men. Is there also pay inequality between information science workers within the same position, or is it mostly this disparity in the roles people have that contributes to pay inequity within our field?
Oh no, it's definitely about the gender of the people in the roles too. again, like if you're able to look at like public library salaries or public university salaries, they are very revealing because you can just see it on the face basically. You can see the differences in what they are paying a guy to do the same work that a female manager is doing. So yeah, that's I would say it's it's in the role and it's also in gender. The biggest thing that I see on my end is the tech disparity. Working in digital scholarship, a majority of the people who are working alongside you or in adjacent roles or who are in charge, it's tech driven and it tends to be men. Tends to be men in charge, tends to be men doing the tech stuff. So, I think for me at this point, I feel really strongly about trying to engage people from marginalized communities to start looking at some of these tech jobs, start, looking at metadata jobs, start looking at digital curation jobs, start becoming familiar with some of those things, because I know for me, like when I was looking to hire, I went so hard trying to get people of color in my pipeline, and that's like my pipeline was dry. I mean, like to the point where I was calling people on the phone who were like friends of friends, like, hey, might you be interested in this job? But the job description as it was written and with some of the requirements that were there, I couldn't get anybody in my pipeline who had, some of that background. And that sucks. But I also know that, part of that is the way that people talk to us about tech before we come into the game, or the assumptions that they make about what they think that we know versus what we actually know, the chances that people are willing to take on you in terms of mentoring you and pulling you along into the field. So that's really challenging, and it drives me crazy. So I do try. And those are things that, you or others are interested in, being able, I think, to find a mentor at some level could be the difference in, helping you get in and helping you move up in some kind of trajectory.
Okay, I still have more. Got one here. Can you please speak about union membership and pay issues, especially regarding workplaces that don't have and/or are hostile to union organizing?
You said union membership at places where?
Especially workplaces that don't have union organizing or are hostile to union organizing.
Well, okay, so the thing about union organizing is that, everybody has to start somewhere. One actually really great resource I would totally recommend is there is a book. It's actually about organizing at Harvard, and the book is called "We Can't Eat Prestige," and that's how they it just tells the story of how union organizing came to the Harvard libraries. Excuse me. And it was. I mean, it's everybody has to start somewhere, and again, it's that community engagement with the people around you. It's punching up and down the ladder for equity, and really trying to get everybody on the same page. There's a lot of different reasons why some people may or may not want to join your union. So being able to get everybody in the same room on the same page about the benefits to them, that's probably the biggest thing that I could say. I wish that I could be more specific about union organizing. It's just that wasn't, like when I got my union job in a library, like the union had just been there. It was all set up for me. I walked into it gratefully. I very gratefully walked into that situation. But the heavy lifting had been done by people who had gotten there 20 years before me. I do also think, though, that, when you're talking about union organizing, you have to have people involved in that fight for whom, like their daily existence is not necessarily on the line. There has to be coalition from, not just the people with the most to lose, but you need people engaged in this struggle who can fight the hardest, because maybe it's not a big deal to them if they did lose their jobs. You know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes you need those people to stand out in front and kind of take the heat for the people who could potentially have a little bit more to lose by being visible in that kind of fight.
Stacie, as a manager, I'm curious about any responsibilities you have to sort of reflect the administration and what top level might want, and then the interests of the people who report to you or who are on your level, when it comes to pay or any other topic.
Okay, that's a good question. Let me think about that for a moment. So I'm basically a middle manager right now, which means that I had to come to terms with the limits of my power pretty early on. But when it comes to things like pay, or any aspect of the working experience for my staff, I just kind of feel like it's my job to advocate for them with whatever they need. So, I might not be able to fight for you to get a raise right away, though I absolutely have made recommendations for bonuses and things, because yeah, I feel like when I see awesome extra work happening, that should absolutely be recognized and compensated appropriately. But knowing that all of those things have to go through more or less university administration. I try to do what I can there when it comes to straight up actual money, and when I have reached the limits of actual money, I just try to advocate for a comfortable and accommodating workplace. And I try to structure everyone's jobs in such a way that, we're trying to make it a less to zero oppressive environment. So, for instance, maybe one thing that I did was, we have our digital scholarship center that comes with an actual service center desk. And when I first started working here, basically all of the maintenance and effective labor was being done by 2 women on staff, while the males of the team were doing more of the prestige work, like the handling faculty and going to all the conferences and doing the speaking. And I was like, nah, we're not doing that anymore. So I took a look at the team and everybody's, kind of their, their best skills or their best experiences, and I changed the service model. So now everyone, including myself, has to spend a 3-day shift down at the service center, work the desk. You learn how to print those posters and laminate cards just like the students. They all are trained on the the technical equipment in the center. And then the things that have to be done every single month, I have split those among members. So, and I've tried to split them in such a way that adds value for my staff. So for members of my team who actually want supervisory experience and maybe want to be able to build a trajectory, I'll say, well, okay, I'm putting you in charge of student scheduling and student evaluations. For people who, want some experience handling a budget, I say, well, okay, you're going to be the one to order supplies, or take care of the invoices at the end of every month. So I split up the tasks according to not just making things more equitable as far as the labor distribution, but also just trying to help people grow their skills and grow their own experiences. So that's, I know that the answer, as a manager, the answer isn't always going to just be able to be, hey, more money. That's, I mean, yeah. Yeah, everybody wants more money, but if we can't do that, there are other things that we can do to make it a more equitable and a less oppressive workplace for your people. So.
To what extent is there documented pay inequity between white librarians and librarians of color? Further, in your experience, undocumented, unpaid labor are undertaken primarily by librarians of color, and assuming most white people will continue to not do that work themselves, how could that labor be appropriately highlighted and compensated?
Well, okay, so that's all right. I'm gonna try to break that up a little bit, and I might have to ask again for the second part. This is a big question. So undocumented labor done by people of color in the field. Well, I mean, a big example of that is the way in which, certain third-party vendors and also also units of the U.S. government contract with private prisons to do digitization work of special collections material that ends up going on like Ancestry.com. That labor is being done by people who are incarcerated, who we know are disproportionately Black and brown. They maybe are getting the equivalent of something like 30 cents a day, maybe, or like 30 cents an hour or something. Like, either way, it's awful and it's really wrong. But that, that's a lot of undocumented labor right there. And it's not even just the digitization things. There are some states who they have contracts with private prisons and people who are incarcerated are then in there making furniture that is like supplied to archives or special collections or some libraries. So that's one example. I mean, certainly there are other ways, and I think, again, if you're talking about what late stage capitalism looks like, the people who bear the brunt of, this sort of undocumented, invisible labor tend to be people of color, because the people who can actually afford options, they're not going to do that. They're not doing that. So it's people of color. It's students. We have pushed so much of the actual production labor that happens in libraries and archives onto students who have no rights, no organizing rights. Some students at these places are paid so little, it's almost insulting, actually. Like, people could be starving out here. So I mean, that's just, I guess those are examples. And then what was the other part of the question?
Assuming most white people will continue to not do that work themselves, how could that labor be appropriately highlighted and compensated?
Okay, you said how can it be? I'm just taking notes to make sure I'm writing, make sure I'm answering like the whole question. How can it be highlighted and compensated? Yep. Okay. Well, there are some good models. Now I'll say the contracting to the private prisons is a really hard one, because essentially that means, the state has made a decision to do that. And, while I do think that putting pressure on politicians to bring attention to something like that could maybe possibly work, you'd have to get a huge groundswell of people, I think, invested in making that change to get states to divest from that model. It's also saving them money, right? So that's how they're looking at it. Now, I'm not saying that we give up on fighting for rights of the incarcerated. Just pointing out the very uphill battle that you have there. So how can it be highlighted and compensated? I mean, you first have to bring people's attention to that. Most people don't know that is even a thing that companies like Ancestry or the Church of Latter-day Saints contract out to prisons, to private prisons, to have that work done. So I think by making people just aware of it, you can start to bring attention to the problem and then start to, apply the appropriate pressure to get institutions to divest. As far as students, I do think that there are some really good models out there. UCLA's Digital Humanities program has come up with what they call a Student Bill of Rights for their program. And it basically means that, when you have students on a project, you're kind of, I think it's that they want you to sign an agreement that says that you're not exploiting your students, that you're paying them fair wages, and that if they are doing, more than a certain percentage of work on a particular research project for a faculty member, that they are fully credited as co-authors or contributors to a project, that they are allowed to, present and create scholarly research bearing their name on it that, gets them further institutional credit. Because that's a lot of what happens, right? You have students working in a lab who are they are doing the straight up research work. And then a professor comes in at the end and they're like, okay, great, thanks. Now I'm going to go jet all over the place and talk about this great research that I did. But they did not necessarily do that research. They weren't running the rats in the lab or mixing the chemicals. They're just, they're looking at the notes and they compile it and then they are getting all the credit. So I do think that there are some places, really trying to think about and implement models that that take a strong stand and say we're not going to do this research and exploit our students. We're not going to keep demanding that they just produce more and more and more and more for us without without giving them credit, without allowing them to create their own work, and without paying them. Now that on my end, I have advocated strongly to make sure that our students are getting paid. We were able to advocate for a student supervisor class of students for our students who work in the Digital Scholarship Center, which is cool for them because it's many of our students, they come in sophomore year and they have to go through such a hardcore training. We like to start them out young, and a lot of our students stay on for the 2 or 3 years that they stay on at the university. Some of them are here for 4 years. And then the supervisors get to actually leave and they can go out into the world and say, hey, I have supervisory experience. So in that way, helping them continue to build their trajectories by making sure that they get paid, making sure that our student fellows are paid well. The KSL library, which is where I work, is one of the best paying jobs on campus. And I always say that, I feel like our students are really, really awesome, but I also acknowledge that, hey, it's because we pay them well. So it's not that they're magical unicorns dropping out of the sky just doing an awesome job because they feel like doing an awesome job, but they're doing an awesome job for us because we're helping them keep their bills paid and food in their mouths, and in some cases, paying for tuition.
I have 2 more questions that were sent in ahead of time.
Okay.
First is, how does the need for professional association membership contribute to pay inequity in the field?
Oh, man. That is a complex question. But it is so I think there's a couple levels there. I'm writing because I'm kind of trying to diagram it out in my mind, so I'm explaining this properly. So the first level is simply that, if you come into college, with an income gap, if you come into college with anything less than upper middle class, it's kind of like you're already behind, right? So you come into college, you're already behind, and all of a sudden people are saying, hey, you got an extra couple $100 to join this organization, and then you'll get all the benefits of this organization. Well, you might not have a couple $100 to do that. When I was at Simmons, that was the first time I had done that, and that was because, we got that we got that money. I can't even remember what the money is called now. Everybody gets the money, right? Everybody gets like a couple $100. Yeah. I don't know why I can't remember what it's called now, because it was certainly very helpful to me while I was there. But I used that to pay for a couple of conference memberships, and I kind of like tried to time it so that my renewal date would come just before graduation, and I could like coast on a student membership for like a little while longer. So just a tip, just FYI, that's something that you have the ability to do. But it's okay. So there's one example. If you come in already behind the game, it's very hard to then just find that money out of nowhere to all of a sudden join this organization and get these benefits. So people who basically, then it means that people who start out in our field behind end up staying behind because we haven't come up with ways to include them and bring them into the fold without demanding that they pay all this money. And then I think the second level of that is the second level of that is maybe what professional association membership might actually entail, right? So you get in, if you happen to have so say you do finally get in, but again, if you were behind and maybe you say, well, gosh, I'd like to join, X, Y, and Z committee. I'd like to do this committee work, or I'd like to, run for office or something. It's a massive time commitment. And if for whatever reason, you don't have that extra time in your outside life to take on what, in some cases could be like a part-time job. I've served on a couple committees where, the work involved, you might have been looking at 20 hours a month or something. Like you might have been looking at an actually pretty extensive period of time, of your time, on a weekly basis. And when you cannot be involved at those levels, I think that sometimes the association memberships can then become this self-perpetuating thing where you might be in, but you might feel like you're not necessarily seeing the benefits that you would like to see because maybe you are not able to afford all of this extra time and labor basically to make yourself visible within the organization. So I think that's a huge deal, and it's it is challenging, I think, figuring out how to get around that. I think that the unconference model is great because you can be engaged at a much lower price point. It doesn't even necessarily demand that you join an org. An unconference you can usually come through, and there's usually people there with whom you can start making connections and try to network without taking on that added labor, unless you're planning the unconference. That would be a lot of work. Let's not pretend like the unconference won't be a lot of work. But those are two ways I think in which like labor and class can kind of contribute to inequities in the field, and trying to figure out how to get around that. Another thing that I would suggest too is that, at least for me, being at Simmons, there were so many people I met being on site, and I know this is so much harder too when you are solely in an online program. It's like, oh, how do I meet these people that I'm in class with? But when I was at Simmons, I was there in person. And quite honestly, many of the people I met in that program became like a small cohort, and we've remained in touch. And for an even smaller group of us, we've gone really hard on the peer mentoring aspect. So I think, a lot of times people will join professional associations and hope to get that out of the association. And sometimes you can get that, but I think in other cases like ALA, where ALA is so big, ALA, I think for me was so vast. I don't know how many hardcore connections I was really making in ALA. I made connections with my classmates and those things endured, or there were people I might have met online and those things endured, and in many ways were, number one, a lot more cost effective than professional membership organizations, but also, were a bit more, maybe just more intimate, and in some cases maybe even just more helpful than sometimes membership. Now I say that, and if you look at my CV, yeah, you'll see like a lot of memberships on there. I'll say I've actually had to like drop a few. I definitely had to drop a few after I got out of school because I just couldn't afford to maintain all that. Like I was in SLA, I couldn't afford to maintain SLA. And I am still in SAA, definitely in SAA, but as my job changes, my bosses want me to go to different conferences and stuff or join different organizations. So, you're always kind of like trying to juggle and make decisions on which organization might is not only going to help you, but also like help your organization do what it needs to do.
This is the last one I have from ahead of time. It's what are you most proud of, and what would you change during your time as an information professional?
Interesting question. Perspective. What am I most proud of? That's a good question. And I think I'm pausing not because I'm trying to be on some ego. I think it's that I just was telling somebody this the other day. I kind of like try to decenter myself. So sometimes it's hard to come up with a saying. I mean, I could definitely say that I'm proud of the work that we did with a People's Archive of Police Violence in Cleveland. Like of all the projects I've ever been involved in, that one was just, it was meaningful to me because it had meaning to the people we were trying to help, basically. And meaningful to them because it allowed them to have like some control and autonomy over these stories that they were trying to tell and this work that they were trying to get out into the world. And I think for many of us who were involved, that felt like, this is like the purest form really of trying to increase access and discoverability. And, it's out in the world. It's kind of like its own testament. It's something that helps me feel rooted to the place that I live. Because I did that during SAA in Cleveland, and I didn't know I was going to be living in Cleveland like a year later. I had no idea. But so it's something that makes me kind of feel proud, like within my community, that I feel like maybe I contributed something positive or helped, other people contribute something positive in the community. So I'm like proud of that. And what would I change? What would I change? I do wish I had been better at cataloging, but like I don't know that I could like change that. Just, you were gonna give me magic powers and tell me that cataloging was gonna make more sense to me. That would have been cool. But what was great about cataloging was that again I kind of that was where I met like more colleagues and friends in the program. I was upstairs in the cat lab like about to burst into tears, and someone who is now a good friend saw me over there, and she was trying to figure out the assignment with two other people from our class, and she was just like, "Hey, you're in my class. Come over here and let's figure this out." And then I was like, oh, okay, cataloging. Because cataloging stressed me out. Stressed me out a lot. So yeah, but I don't know that I would change anything honestly because it was such a I felt like really important experience that I had, and even the things that might have ended up, like being a mistake or something, I felt like I made a lot out of my Simmons experience, and I liked it a lot. I mean, the things that I guess I would have wanted to criticize. I mean, I made my peace with them, or I've been more public about making recommendations to change things that I think might be problematic in LIS programs all over. But it was good. It was good. I wouldn't change anything yet.
Anybody in the room have any other questions, or our viewer on YouTube?
I'm so busy passing on other people's words, I didn't think of any questions myself.
I hope I was able to answer all the things and be clear. I really do wish that I had more like super detailed information about the union organizing, but I would definitely recommend that everybody read a copy of We Can't Eat Prestige, for sure. And I also just try to follow librarians and other professionals who are really in the trenches right now in labor organizing. And I think, especially like if any of you in the room are archivists, I think, the power in being able to look back through archives and look at historical labor movements. I mean, nothing happens in a bubble, right? Like we're all influenced by various historical factors or various systemic factors. So there's a lot that we can learn from previous labor organizing movements that can be applied to times of now, because this isn't, it isn't just new now. We feel like it's coming down pretty harsh, but imagine what if we remember and go back what labor situations looked like before anything had been established, Triangle Shirtwaist Fire and things like that. I mean, we know how awful it was before anything got started. So all of our movements have to start somewhere. So I definitely, for people who are like, I don't even know where to start, I think our history is a really good place to start.
Thank you so much. Like, this has been a super, super amazing talk. I feel like I've taken like tons of notes. Just like taking it. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I used to love doing events with PLG, so it felt really special actually. I'm glad to see PLG is still doing awesome things.
PLG is still
The Spectra.
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking. I hope it was useful.
Definitely. Thank you.